Welcome back, listeners, to Humans Do What? The premier podcast on the Human Shriley Alliance, and all the news you need to stay in the loop. I am Speaker Trofar Alor, here to walk my fellow Shriley through the oddities of our little human friends. Now, let's look at the Humans Do What poll from last week. For new listeners, this is where I take the most frequent viewer questions and you vote on which one we answer. With 68% of the vote, we have, do humans feel pain? Sorry to the rest of you who voted for, are humans really half as big as a Shriley? And why do humans keep drawing Shriley smut? Continue casting your votes, and maybe we'll get to those in a future episode. For legal reasons, nothing I say here can be used as medical, judicial, structural, or courting advice. So, humans and pain. The simple answer is, yes, they do. Here's an excerpt from a study done by Hecthriel University's Human Research Department on Phil Rag Prime. The Shriley nervous system is intricate, linking one pain receptor to each plate of our exoskeleton. This means hundreds of nerves. Most are taken up by each of the dozens of plates on all 12 of our limbs. If any of that chitin gets damaged, that pain receptor lets us know, allowing us to seek medical aid. Humans have millions of pain receptors. They have a semi-porous membrane covering their bodies called skin, with an average of 200 pain receptors per square centimeter. Some places, like the tips of their fingers, have anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 each. That means, despite being significantly larger, even the biggest Shriley warrior caste has fewer pain receptors than the smallest human larvae. Excerpt from A Treatise on Comparative Shriley Human Neurological Biology, Professor Cesra Trani. Thanks again to Professor Cesra, a frequent source for the science side of our show. That excerpt leads to the question, though. If humans feel pain so much, then why do so many Shriley think they don't feel it at all? Once again, I turned to the good professor, who was kind enough to send me a snippet from her upcoming book, Humans, the Kindest Monsters. Humans and a number of the native species to their home planet produce a chemical called adrenaline. This powerful hormone acts in a lot of ways similar to the potent combat stimulant SDC-S65B. It causes pain to be muted, if not entirely removed from their perception. Adrenaline has a human-specific benefit as well, allowing them access to enhanced physical strength and endurance. Feats that would normally be impossible because it would cause the human incredible stress and pain become almost easy. It should also be noted that the adrenaline compound is very short-lived, sometimes only working for hours or even mere minutes. After the hormone has been metabolized in their endocrine system, any and all damage done during the time they were adrenalized is experienced fully and without filter. If a human doesn't show pain at this point, it is either from a neurological disorder or what is called a high pain threshold. The concept of a pain threshold will be discussed in a later chapter. Now, that was informative. Still, this isn't a purely science podcast. Having the studies and numbers is all well and good, but what does it mean? How do these humans feel when they are in the moment? What are the effects of the Shriley around them? To answer that, I traveled to Tremar Prime. Many listeners will be familiar with Tremar Prime and the tragic incident that took place there only a few short cycles ago. For everyone else, a Koth-Liod-class cargo freighter crash-landed on the planet, colliding with the city of New Cresthaven. The city was primarily human-inhabited, but with a small growing Shriley population. So, I looked for the Shriley who witnessed what happened, and specifically, what happened to the humans. It is at this point that I must warn my listeners. If you are faint of heart, or graphic content makes you void your stomachs, you may want to tune in next week. The following testimonials they weren't easy to listen to. This is Trofar Lore interviewing Gathra Aniva for the Humans Do What podcast. Gathra was kind enough to invite me into his home in the living sector of New Cresthaven, We are roughly 40 kilometers from the crash site here. You must be thankful for that.
Yes. I was very lucky. I can't afford much, as you can see, but it all stayed safe. I even have running water and electricity most of the time. Sometimes the power has to be diverted to the hospital, but I don't mind that.
For my listeners, Gathra is a labor caste, and his apartment is a cozy two-nest open concept. I love the curtains, by the way. Such a lovely shade of blue.
Thanks. I got them after the crash. It was hard to look out that window, and the blue matches this human puppet thing called a Cookie Monster from some child program. My friend Rick likes that show.
Speaking of your friend, he's in the hospital now, right?
Yes, speaker, ma'am.
Please, call me Tropha. Could you tell me, how did you meet Rick?
Yes, ma'am. Speaker Tofra. I work with him in this big business building as a janitor. Rick, he and I sweep, mop, do the carpets, take out the trash. It's not glamorous or nothing, but it's honest work, and not nearly as carapace cracking as some of the labor caste jobs on a ship or back on Drahar 8.
Could you describe Rick for the listeners, please?
Oh, yeah, of course. He's a male, a little less than 2 meters tall, and much more round-shaped, not like their warrior castes. You know the tufts of fur the humans have? Well, there's not much on the top of his head, but he has a bunch attached to his chin. All of it is white or gray-colored. He's also pretty old for a working human. Rick says humans can live up to 120 or 30, but most stop working around 80 these days. He likes working, though, goes stir-crazy at home. One time he told me he'd murder his spouse if he had to spend all day with them. So, even at 93, he keeps emptying the bins with me.
Excellent, thank you. Now, I know it must be difficult, but to the best of your memory, could you please tell me what happened at the crash?
Of course. You gotta understand. We had no idea what was going on. We were on the first floor putting away the mop buckets when it struck. Just this big, incredibly loud bang, and outside the street suddenly disappears behind a wall of dust. Then the building starts shaking something fierce. Some plants fall off their plinths, windows break. My instincts told me the whole damn place would come down around us, you know? I remember thinking, I just cleaned this floor, even as I was expecting to get crushed to death. Your brain can do funny things when you're in danger. That's what I thought happened to Rick, too, since he started running for the stairs. "The exit's over there!" I yelled at him. We were standing maybe 10 meters away from the doors. "There's a daycare on the 3rd floor, Tabernacle," he shouted back, not even slowing down.
Tabernacle? That word doesn't translate.
Rick comes from this planet called New Quebec. Tabernacle is a kind of curse word, I think. The translator has a hard time with it because it means church box or something, but has the emphasis of a swear word. He says it a lot. Anyway, I followed him. I didn't even realize I was going to, but my legs carried me in his wake. The 2nd floor looked worse off than the lobby, and the 3rd was much, much worse. I found out later that a Shrally shipping container barreled through the exterior wall on the 4th floor and broke through the 3rd floor ceiling. The folk in those offices, they...
It's okay, Gathra. What happened with Rick in the daycare?
Oh, sorry. Well, he ran down the hall and tried to open the door, but the frame got crushed a bit. The door was basically part of the wall at that point. Instead of leaving, though, he started kicking at the thing. You should know, ma'am, Rick's not a strong guy. If there's a way to do stuff easily, he'll find it. I haul 3 full bin bags to the recycler, but Rick, he'll load one onto a trolley and make the trip 3 times. I've seen him struggle with an over-full mop bucket. But he kicked that door in like it was made of paper. He kicked it once and I heard a cracking sound. Then he kicked it again and the wood splintered. On the 3rd kick, it flew wide open. Inside were a bunch of kids and this human lady. She was smiling, singing, clapping her hands to play with the children. It was like nothing was wrong at all, except there was a corner where the room was collapsed entirely, and the lady has a piece of wood sticking out of her back, just below where her ribs were. She turned to us, and even though she's a lot paler than humans ought to be, and there's a lot of stress in her smile, she says, 'Kids, look, Santa!' She pointed at Rick. I looked into it after when I could, and this Santa is some sort of magic fairy that brings kids gifts and such. Looks just like Rick if he covers his tattoos and such." "Ho, ho, ho, kid," says Rick, holding his belly and laughing. "I think we should get you to your parents." He walked in and started picking up the largest ones. When some of the children looked afraid of me, he called me an elf and handed me 5 of them to carry. He had 4 in his arms and another on his back, with the daycare lady carrying the last 2. We made it out and found some healer cast for the daycare lady. Rick had to promise that we'd look after them before she let the medical casts take her away. And I mean let them, since it was taking 2 of them to restrain her long enough to get a sedative in. We spent the next few hours entertaining the children until their parents came for them.
That's a harrowing story. If you don't mind me asking, why is Rick in the hospital now? It doesn't sound like he got hurt.
I didn't think so either until I visited him. Turns out when he kicked that door the first time, he broke his foot. I don't mean a little fracture or anything. He showed me the x-rays when I found him in the hospital. The bones were basically gravel, and the doctors were going to have to remove the whole thing at his ankle. He didn't complain once or shed a tear during the entire ordeal. Well, not until the kids came to visit.
I'm sorry?
This was a couple days ago, after things had settled down a lot. I was come to see Rick. I do that most days. We usually meet outside since the rooms and halls are so busy. It turns out a bunch of those kids he brought down with me were visiting the lady, and one of them saw Rick in his wheelchair. They all ran up, and the one who led the charge handed Rick the blue puppet I mentioned earlier. "You gave me this last year, Santa," the kid said. "He makes me feel better when I hug him. I want you to feel better, too." Rick took the toy, gave his thanks, and made a production of squeezing the little thing. Then when they left, he started crying. Bawling, really. I thought the last few days had caught up with him. He was finally realizing what he'd lost, that he'd be hobbling around the rest of his life, unable to work anymore. He shook his head when I asked. "No, you dumb bug." He held up the stuffed toy, still trying to get his breath under control. "I'm happy. Never been happier. Losing my foot, all that pain, for this, worth it."
So, he felt the pain of turning his foot bones to gravel?
"No, something about adrenaline," he said. "But after getting all the children out to the street, yup, he just ignored it and said he didn't have time for pain. I'm going to visit now if you'd like to meet him."
Maybe another time. I have an appointment in the city soon. Thank you very much for your story, Gathra, and I wish your friend a speedy recovery. This is Trofar Alor, interviewing HFY Mthal for the Humans Do What podcast in Cresthaven, Fire Station 15. I've never been inside a fire station, so thank you for allowing me to hold this interview here.
"It's absolutely my pleasure, Madam Speaker. It's not every day a brute like me gets to host a lady sporting such an opalescent carapace."
Oh my, well, while I enjoy a compliment as much as the next trolley, I'd like to keep this conversation professional, please.
"It will be a challenge, but I'll try to restrain the many, many endearing comments about you. Until after the interview, at least."
Are you sure you're a warrior caste and not a speaker caste?
"I'm a bit big for a speaker, and you know the warrior caste are the only Shrali who can do firefighting. We have the nerve to handle the truly dangerous stuff."
And the nerve to flirt with higher castes, it seems. You have, however, inadvertently brought us to the subject of nerves. In this instance, pain receptors. After a bit of asking around, I was told that you witnessed a human ignoring pain in the recent tragic circumstances. Would you care to retell the events?
"If you promise you'll share a cup of Siloben tea with me later."
Ooh, you're lucky I have a weakness for slate-colored carapace. Fine, you have a deal, Heshtsa. So, the ship crashed and you were...
"I was here like I am most days. A lot of firefighters practically live in the fire station so we can get to emergencies quickly. When the ship came down, well, I was suiting up about a minute after the first tremors shook through the ground. We didn't even know if there were any fires for us to go to yet. By the time we were in the extinguisher sled, we had the pick of nearly 36 locations. The computer picked out our priorities. It's got this whole algorithm to determine the best use of resources to save the most lives. It actually had us drive past 2 other fires, a restaurant and a car fire, if I remember correctly, before we made it to our target. It was an apartment building. Best as we can figure, when the ship came down, the reactor coolant mainline ruptured like an artery. It doused the entire structure from almost 2 blocks away. That stuff doesn't need much excuse to go up in flames. A small electrical spark, somebody's barbecue. Thinking particularly hot thoughts while looking at it could start a fire. It didn't matter, ultimately. 1 second, the place is fine. The next, the whole damn thing looks like the 3rd pit of Farah Ara's domain.
Huh, you didn't strike me as religious. Do you actually believe that Farah Ara will come get you if you don't finish your mushroom soup?
You joke, but I've seen some things, one of which happened at that very fire. When we arrived, the first thing we did was release the drones for the property scan. They use a type of infrasonic sonar to find bodies and map the interior. Anyway, as soon as that's done, everybody gets designated individuals to start hauling out, displayed on our visor HUD. Then we got to work. Most Shrali get assigned to Shrali, and humans to humans, in these kinds of situations. The numbers don't always, or even often, pan out to be 1-to-1, but it helps more than you'd imagine. Apparently, when a human sees a Shrali in full hazard gear burst through a door with fire and smoke all around, they think Farah Ara's own demons have come for them. So I got assigned 5 Shrali who were split between the 2nd and 4th floors. It was an older couple, and a family with their first larvae. They were all made up of the smaller castes, admin and scholar castes at a guess. It's a bit hard to tell in the smoke. Still, I only needed to make 2 trips in order to carry all of them out. After my targets were with the medical services, I was reassigned to the sled, which was fine by me. After diving into an inferno twice, my survival instincts were screaming. I was much happier to be directing the firefighting drones, or aiming the sonic cannon to beat out the flames where possible.
Sounds like things were going fairly well.
As well as can be expected. It was an exterior fire, so it was working its way in and up. Most of the bottom floors were relatively safe. However, fires are by their nature very chaotic events. We do our best to impose some level of order, but the universe absolutely hates us for it and tries to put in more chaos at every opportunity. That's why everything went pretty sideways shortly after I got onto the sled. One of my human co-workers came out with their targets, a woman carrying a human larva, and my colleague holding another. As soon as the woman handed her larva off to one of the medical staff, she started heading back into the building. Let me stress, I am a warrior caste. We are biologically predisposed to put our lives in danger for the benefit of the species. Even then, I had to go through 4 years of training to consciously, and with great effort, walk into the fire. That's while knowing I'm covered in an armored suit that basically makes me fireproof. After all of that, I could only do it a couple of times before my instinct won't allow me to do it again. I managed a 3rd dive exactly 1 time, and I had a literal seizure afterwards. This woman was not a firefighter, no training, and she was wearing a bathrobe. She ran back into the fire like it was her favorite pastime.
Didn't anyone try to stop her?
Of course, the same human co-worker who brought her out tried to restrain her. She punched him so hard his visor shattered. Everybody was so shocked after that, she managed to get through the door before anybody could gather themselves.
Do you know why she ran back in?
Yeah, I found out after. See, the computer assigns us to targets based on their chance of survivability, mixed with our own physical and mental limitations. It's no use sending a firefighter in if they're going to freeze up or fall over from exhaustion. So, after the maths was done, 4 residents were deemed as losses. One of those was this woman's mate, because he was bound to a wheelchair. She'd come out at first to ensure her spawn were saved, then went back in to get him.
Did she succeed?
Yes, but not unscathed. I followed her progress with the drones. She got to the 7th floor, hauled her mate onto her shoulders, and started down. The fire had gotten in by then, so she had to jump out of a window on the 3rd floor to escape. Thankfully, since we were monitoring where they were, we had time to throw down an emergency expanding catchpad. She had caught fire at some point during her descent. Instead of stopping to quell the flames, she just kept going. By the time we put her out, it had spread to cover her right arm, half her torso, and most of her head. She just didn't care. It didn't matter to her as much as saving her mate, so she ignored it. That's not even the scary part. Firefighters. We work pretty closely with the healer caste. Well, I heard one of her eyes was literally boiled in her skull, and the optic nerve was fried, so she can't get a prosthetic. Then, because of how bad the burns were, she needed cloned skin grafts to replace the melted mess she was left with. She suffered such nerve damage that she's going to feel that fire on her. Forever. Can you imagine? For the rest of your life, always feeling like you're on fire? You know what she said when my healer caste friend told her that? Worth it.
I see. Thank you, HFY, for recounting this to me.
My pleasure, Speaker Tropa. It's a lot to think about sometimes. I'm pretty sure talking to you may have helped me more than I helped you.
Half the time, I believe my cast should be called listeners instead of speakers. Either way, I'm very glad to hear this chat helped. Unfortunately, I have to get going to my next interview. I'll contact you later.
For a follow-up?
For that silo ben tea I promised you. Is 4th meal acceptable?
Oh, yes. I can't believe I forgot.
I'll try not to take it personally. Until then, HFY. This is Trofar Lore interviewing Thrush Ka Elfor for the Humans Do What podcast in St. Anthony's General Hospital. Thank you for meeting with me. I know this must be very difficult for you.
Yes, but it is important as well. I want to make sure the story of what happened gets out before too many conspiracy theories or propaganda take root. For that, Speaker, I must express my sincere appreciation for taking the time to talk with me.
While not everyone would agree, a speaker's first calling is to report the truth. Could you please introduce yourself to my listeners and describe your position?
Of course. I am Thrush Ka L4, a scholar caste, specializing in reactor engineering. Up until earlier this week, I served as 4th seat engineer aboard the ship that crashed into New Cresthaven.
You seem to be in relatively good health, given the circumstances. For our listeners, Thrashka is missing a tertiary manipulator and suffered some slight cracking on his backplates.
Yes, well, I got lucky. The manipulator wasn't even technically due to the crash.
Speaking of crash, can you shed some light on what happened? Theories abound, from Craxian spies to industrial sabotage or possible insurance fraud.
It's not any of those, nor anything nearly as exciting. Not to oversimplify it, but a faulty containment magnet died. These are pretty robust pieces, and they get checked regularly, but they fail. It happens. Normally, when they go, a secondary system kicks in to maintain the magnetic field. Ours couldn't cover the hole in the field adequately. It was old and tended to become spotty when we were going through atmosphere. It wasn't some plot. Nobody planned to drop our cargo ship on a populated city. A faulty part failed at the worst time possible. I know the Shrali government is looking for somebody to blame. They think the humans want that, an easy target to point at, to say it's their fault.
Do you assume you're that person?
No, If I was, I'd be all right with that. I'm a low-level engineer. I could probably go back to school, get a different vocation. I may do that anyway. The idea of going near another reactor. I'm sorry. No. They want to pin the blame on her.
Thrashka, my listeners can't see who you're pointing to.
Oh, of course. I'm a bit out of sorts.
It's all right. Listeners, we're currently sitting at the bedside of a heavily bandaged human female. She's unconscious, and we've been told that it's unlikely our talk here will disturb her.
Kat.
Pardon?
Her name is Kat. Catherine Ibrahim. She was an engineer like me, 6th seat. My captain hired her because having a human on board gave him some kind of tax break through the cross-species exchange initiative or something. She was good at her job, even though my idiot captain didn't bother getting her any aids to help her access Shrali stations. She had to carry around a step stool to reach her console. The first engineer used her a lot to get into the small places otherwise. Most of the staff considered her a waste of time, that she wasn't worth the effort. It was just another instance of our cheapskate captain saving another Commonwealth credit at our expense. I was the same for a while, ignoring her, thinking myself superior. All because I could reach my levers and read the displays that weren't meant for her binocular vision. Despite my derision, we worked together often because we held similar ranks. Eventually, I had to admit she was much better than any of us were giving her credit for. It's like she had a second sense for when things were going wrong. One time she stopped what she was doing, put a hand on the deck plates and rushed off. Turns out a coolant fan had rattled loose during FTL. It could have caused a lot of hard-to-track issues, but she could feel it in the shimmy of the ship. After a few more instances like that, I deferred to her more than my superiors. Then we started spending time together outside of work hours. Then more than just time.
It sounds like you two are very close.
Yes, we are. Humans have a tradition about lifelong mate couplings.
Oh, you mean marriage jewelry? I did an episode on that a while ago.
I know. It was actually very helpful when I was doing my research. I saved up for a couple of months to get her this.
Oh, that is a very shiny rock. Usually it's on a ring, though, isn't it?
She doesn't wear rings. Something about degloving. So I got a diamond inset into a pair of pliers. It's a bit different from standard, but if you knew her, you'd agree it fit.
I'm sure she'll love it.
No, I'm going to continue with my story, if that's all right. What happened, I mean.
Yes, that's all right.
Thank you. As I was saying, she had a sense for when things were going out on the ship. So, as our descent procedures were spooling, she stopped working. I've seen her do this a million times, so I follow when she starts running for the reactor. She pressed her ear up to the reactor housing, then began swearing. Shit, 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 she keeps saying, rushing over to the control panel. Shut it down! Don't go into the atmosphere! We have to pull up to orbit, she shouted. But none of the higher-seated engineers listened. They had the authorization codes to abort. She couldn't do it on her own. They didn't listen to me either when I begged them to listen. They considered me her pet and just as useless. When we felt the ship hit the ionosphere, it was too late. The alarms went off, reactor containment failing. The reason containment breaches are such a big deal is because the plasma escapes and vaporizes nearby equipment. Things like the fuel regulator. As soon as that magnet went, so did our ability to starve the reaction. At this point, we were going to crash. There was no way around it. Cargo ships can't glide on emergency power. We barely had directional ion thrusters. Knowing this, everybody fled to their crash bays. Well, except Kat and I. She ran to the reactor and opened the maintenance hatch. You have to realize that the hatch is only supposed to be opened when the reactor is shut down. She was almost blown away by the heat, but still managed to climb inside. When I tried to pull her out, she punched me and slammed the hatch closed. That's how I lost my manipulator. It got crushed between the door and the housing. It actually saved my life, since it kept me pinned down during the crash. I rattled around a lot, but I only suffered some minor cracks.
You must be in a lot of pain, still.
I am enjoying an impressive amount of narcotics at the moment.
What happened to Kat then? Did she get burned?
Of course she did. Most of the heat was contained in the plasma channel, and the maintenance hatch had just led through the outer shielding. But it was still hot enough to kill me immediately. Humans are sturdier than Shrali, though, so while she was cooking alive, she turned the manual fuel port on the inner housing to starve the reaction. That's not why she's here, though. Burns can be healed. Skin grafts, I think. But Kat went into the reactor while it was going through a criticality event. A lot of people misunderstand fusion as safer than fission because it doesn't have waste products, but it does. They don't understand that fusion means breaking atoms apart into electrons, protons, and neutrons. Those neutrons are so high energy that they make the reactor walls into radioactive plates. Kat got an extremely high dose of neutron radiation.
Why did she do that, if the ship was already going to crash?
Because of what she did, the ship only crashed. We have a horrible tragedy with a massive cargo ship double parked inside a city block. With the fusion reactor in full sustained cascade and enriched deuterium pouring in, New Cresthaven would have an irradiated crater instead of a city center. This city owes her for saving millions of lives.
That's incredible. When did the doctors say she will be better, so she can tell her own story and receive the accolades she deserves?
You don't understand. The dose she got, it was so lethal that I would have been dead on the spot.
But humans are practically bulletproof. We did an episode on...
I wish she wasn't as sturdy as she is.
What? Why?
All of her organs are falling apart at an atomic level, each nerve unraveling micron by micron. Nothing can save her. They've tried, but she's human, so strong in so many ways. It's because of that strength that she's going to take weeks to die. Weeks! The entire time will be an agony I couldn't even imagine.
Oh my goodness. That's terrible. I'm so sorry for...
Cat! Honey, are you awake? Hold on, I'll get the doctor.
What is she trying to say?
Cat, what is it? What do you need?
Well, worth it.